The break room at Millfield Regional Hospital smelled like burnt coffee and fluorescent light, the kind of place where exhaustion became permanent if you stayed too long. But Ro Callahan was not in the break room. He was in the hallway outside Pediatric Ward 3, holding a vending machine sandwich he hadn't eaten and watching through the narrow window as the man in the designer suit leaned too close to the young charge nurse behind the station desk. Ro had learned to read rooms the same way he'd learned to read weather before a long drive. Not by dramatic signs, but by the small ones. The way the nurse kept her eyes down even when she answered. The way her hand moved to her badge and back nervous and quick, like she was checking it was still there. The way the man's voice, though Ro couldn't hear the exact words through the glass, carried the rhythm of someone who enjoyed the shape of commands more than the outcome. He looked down at his daughter Sophie, 7 years old, holding his hand with both of hers and staring up at a mobile of paper stars someone had taped near the elevator. "Those are pretty," Sophie said. "Yeah," Ro said. "Why is that man yelling?" Ro looked back at the window. The suited man had set something, a clipboard or a folder, down on the desk with the kind of force meant to be a statement rather than an accident. The nurse flinched before she caught herself. Sophie tugged his sleeve. "Dad, I see it," he said quietly. Ro set the sandwich on the window ledge and walked toward the nurse's station. His name was Ro Callahan, 38 years old, owner of a 2-truck HVAC repair company that serviced half the commercial buildings in the county, father of one daughter who had inherited her mother's habit of noticing things adults preferred to overlook. He was not a large man in the obvious sense, not the kind of presence that announced itself before it arrived. But he had spent 4 years doing structural repair work after his discharge, learning that the quietest part of a building was usually the one closest to collapse, and that lesson had transferred to people in ways he hadn't expected. The man at the desk was still talking when Ro stopped 3 feet behind him. The nurse, her badge read Priya, had both hands flat on the desk now, chin slightly lifted, the posture of someone absorbing something they were not allowed to answer. "Excuse me," Ro said. The man turned with the slow patience of someone used to being interrupted only by people who mattered. He was probably 50, silver at the temples, suit jacket open to reveal a tie that cost more than Ro's truck payment. His expression performed annoyance the way certain people performed everything, precisely for an audience he assumed was always watching. "I'm in a conversation," the man said. "I know," Ro said. "That's why I'm here." The man's eyes did a fast inventory: jeans, work boots, the faded Callahan Heating and Air logo on Ro's left chest. His expression reset to something slower and colder. "You work in this building?" "Maintenance contract," Ro said. "But that's not what's happening right now." Priya looked up, surprise crossing her face before she controlled it. The man straightened his jacket with one precise motion. "This is a private administrative matter. I'd suggest you return to whatever pipe you came from." The break room had gone quiet behind Ro. 2 other nurses had appeared at the far end of the hall. A hospital security officer near the elevator was watching without moving. Ro didn't raise his voice. He'd learned that too. That volume was often what people expected, and expectation was its own kind of armor. "I watched you slam that folder down on her desk. I watched her flinch. So this isn't private anymore." The man's jaw tightened. "Do you know who I am?" "No," Ro said. "But I know what you're doing." Priya made a small sound. Not quite a breath, not quite a word, and for just a moment her expression shifted into something that didn't belong on someone who'd spent the last 10 minutes absorbing cruelty. It was sharp, aware, calm in a way that seemed less like relief and more like recognition. The man's name was Gerald Stovall, Regional Director of Operations for Hadley Health Partners, the management group that held the operating contracts for 4 county hospitals, including Millfield Regional. He had spent 19 years building a version of power that relied on nobody being willing to spend their own comfort to interrupt it. He had never been wrong about that, until tonight. He looked at Ro with slow contempt, then at Priya, then back at Ro with the practiced patience of someone composing a longer punishment. "You just made a serious mistake," he said. Ro crossed his arms. "Wouldn't be my first." Gerald took out his phone. The call lasted 40 seconds. When he ended it, he looked at Ro the way a man looks at a problem he has already decided to dissolve rather than solve. "Your maintenance contract with this facility runs through Hadley Partners' vendor approval list. I'll have you removed from that list by morning." Ro felt it, the cold drop in his chest that came not from fear but from arithmetic. Millfield Regional was 30% of his monthly revenue. He kept his face still. Gerald turned to Priya. "And you, I'll have your shift review forwarded to departmental leadership before your next rotation." He said it quietly, which made it worse. Then he left, shoes ringing against tile, unhurried. Sophie had followed Ro to the station. She stood at his elbow and looked up at Priya with the serious, unfiltered attention that children gave to adults in pain. He wasn't very nice, Sophie said. Priya looked down at her. Something moved across her face, not quite a smile, but near one. No, she said. He wasn't. My dad gets sad when people aren't nice, Sophie offered, but he doesn't let it stop him. Priya looked at Ro. The expression in her eyes was harder to read now. Not gratitude, exactly. Something more careful than that. Something that felt like assessment. You shouldn't have done that, she said. Not if it costs you the contract. It was already happening, Ro said. I just stopped watching. Priya absorbed that in silence, then, I'm sorry, this is going to follow you. You said sorry, you didn't cause it. She looked down at the desk for a moment. When she looked back up, there was something Ro could only describe later as a decision in her eyes, like she had just silently moved from one position to another inside herself without showing the seam. What's your company? She asked. Callahan Heating and Air. She nodded once, slowly, the way people nodded when they were recording something and didn't want you to notice. Go home, she said. Both of you. Ro glanced towards Sophie, then back. You going to be okay? Priya's mouth curved slightly. Not enough to be a smile, but enough to feel like one. Yes, she said. I think I will be. Ro didn't sleep well that night. Sophie asked him 3 times during dinner whether the nurse was going to be okay. He told her yes each time and believed it less each time, because the nurses at Millfield were the kind of people who would say fine even when a building was falling, and they were the only ones still holding the door. At 5:40 in the morning, the first text arrived. His contact at Hadley's vendor office. Short, without context. Contract suspended pending internal review. Do not service Millfield Regional until further notice. He sat at the kitchen table with his coffee getting cold and stared at the message until the words stopped meaning anything. By 7, a second cancellation came from Brackenridge Plaza, a commercial property whose lease ran through a Hadley subsidiary Ro hadn't even known existed until last week's invoice. By 7:45, his contact at Donnell Street Medical Office called, voice apologetic in the way people's voices went when they were being forced to be unkind. Ro, I'm sorry. Someone called our property manager this morning. If I keep the contract, they're threatening an early inspection review. Ro thanked him and hung up before the apology could continue. Sophie came downstairs in her school clothes, carrying her backpack by one strap, the way she always did when she sensed something was wrong and was performing normalcy to give him room. Are we okay? She asked. We're still here, he said. She sat down across from him, poured her own cereal, and didn't ask again. She was 7. She already understood that still here sometimes had to be enough. By 8:30, the local news sites were running a clip pulled from hospital corridor footage. The headline above it read, Contractor confronts Hadley executive in hospital hallway. Someone had found his discharge records. Someone else had found an old photo from when he'd coached Sophie's soccer team, cropped to make him look angrier than he was in the moment. The comment section was already a mess. Some people recognizing Gerald Stovall immediately and not sounding surprised. Others calling Ro reckless, unprofessional, a liability. He turned the phone face down when Sophie came back through the kitchen. Somebody posted the video, she said quietly. She had looked at his screen before he flipped it. I know, the comments are mean. Some of them. Are you in trouble? He knelt to her level the way he always did when a real answer was required. I made somebody uncomfortable who had a lot of power, so yes for now. Sophie considered this. Was it worth it? He looked at her. Yeah. It was. She adjusted her backpack strap. Okay, she said, as if that was the accounting she needed. Then, can we still get pancakes on Saturday? He almost laughed. Yes, good. She headed toward the door. Because I already told Grandma we were going. He was locking his truck outside the Brackenridge maintenance bay 2 hours later, the cancellation notice folded in his pocket when a silver sedan pulled into the lot and stopped. The woman who stepped out was not wearing scrubs. She wore gray slacks, a structured jacket the color of charcoal, hair pulled back with a precision that had nothing casual about it. She moved like someone who spent a great deal of time in rooms where movement was watched. For a moment, Ro stood still, because he recognized the posture before he recognized her face. Then he recognized both. You tracked me down, he said. It wasn't quite an accusation. Priya Suresh removed her sunglasses. In the hospital under fluorescent light, wearing scrubs with a Millfield badge clipped to her pocket, she had looked young, overworked, unprotected. Out here in morning light, she looked like someone who had chosen to appear that way. Your truck has your company name on it, she said, and your business address is registered with the county. Ro crossed his arms. You looked up my business address. I wanted to warn you before noon. Another warning. He gave a short, humorless laugh. I've had 4 this morning. Priya did not react to that. She looked at the empty bay behind him, at the cancellation notice still visible in his jacket pocket, at the Callahan Heating and Air logo on the truck door. She took things in the way someone took inventory, without sentiment, without wasted motion. Gerald Stovall doesn't recalibrate, she said. He commits. Once he decides to remove someone from his landscape, he uses every available mechanism until they're gone or they submit. Rowe looked at her steadily. You talk about executive strategy like you wrote the manual. She didn't answer that directly. He's already contacted 2 regional journalists. By tonight, there will be a prepared statement framing you as someone with anger management issues who physically threatened a Hadley executive during a patient care area incident. I didn't touch him. I know that, Priya said. What matters is what plays on screen. Rowe stepped closer. Why does a charge nurse know how a regional director runs his press strategy? Before she could answer, a black SUV turned slowly into the lot from the service road. It moved the way vehicles moved when they wanted to be noticed, slow, unhurried, certain. It stopped at the far edge of the lot, engine running, windows tinted. Priya looked at it without moving. Her expression changed in a way Rowe could not entirely name, not fear. That's his, she said. Private security? Contractors he routes through a vendor account his office manages directly. Off-ledger intimidation. She said it with the flatness of someone reading from a list they had compiled themselves. Rowe stared at her. You know his internal billing structure. Priya's eyes moved from the SUV to Rowe. Yes, she said, and nothing else. A second vehicle turned in behind the first, a Hadley Partners fleet car, white and unmarked. 2 men stepped out wearing company lanyards and carrying tablets. One of them held a sheet of paper. Rowe Callahan, the older one said, already moving toward him. What now? Rowe said flatly. Hadley Partners has received a formal report of threatening conduct directed towards senior regional leadership. We need your signature confirming receipt of this notice, which states that any further contact with Hadley-managed facilities may be treated as criminal trespass. Rowe looked at the paper without taking it. He shoved her. I stepped between them. The man glanced toward Priya without recognition, or performed without recognition. The staff member involved submitted no formal complaint. Rowe turned sharply to Priya. She said nothing. But the younger of the 2 Hadley men had now seen her face clearly, and something happened in his expression, a small, specific contraction, that Rowe clocked immediately. Not confusion, recognition. And behind it, something else entirely, the controlled panic of a man who had just realized he was in the wrong room. Priya looked at both of them without raising her voice. Set that down, she said. The older man blinked. Ma'am, we have authorization from Regional Director Stovall to— I know who authorized it, Priya said. Her tone had changed completely. It was not louder. It was cleaner, the way a scalpel was cleaner than a kitchen knife. Same metal, different precision. What I'm telling you is that using compliance staff to execute personal retaliation violates Hadley's internal conduct standards, 3 vendor ethics clauses, and a federal labor review agreement signed by the executive board in March. You know that. He knows that. Both men went very still. Leave, she said. They left the SUV at the far end of the lot, sat for another 10 seconds, then drove away. The silence afterward felt like the moment after a door sealed shut. Rowe stared at her. Who are you? Priya Suresh met his eyes. She held the pause 1 beat too long before she answered, and in that beat, Rowe understood that whatever came next was something she had been deciding for longer than this conversation. Priya Suresh, she said, Chief Operating Officer, Hadley Health Partners. Rowe said nothing for 3 full seconds. You run the company, he said. I oversee operations for all 4 county facilities, 2 regional satellite offices, and the vendor management framework Gerald has been systematically using to punish people who file complaints against him. Rowe felt the ground shift without moving. He replayed the night before through a completely different lens. The badge that read Priya, the scrubs, the way Walter, no. The way the charge nurse station worked, the deliberately ordinary posture, the name tag that said one name while she was clearly another person. You were there doing an internal audit, covert operational review, she said, initiated after 12 anonymous complaints from nursing staff across 3 facilities over the past 14 months. Gerald knew an audit was in progress. He didn't know I was conducting it. Rowe exhaled once, slowly. And I walked into your investigation. You walked into a situation where someone was being hurt, Priya corrected. What you did after that is not the same thing. Rowe's voice came out lower now, the anger rising through restraint, rather than breaking it. That's a very thoughtful distinction. It doesn't cover the 4 contracts I lost this morning. It doesn't cover the SUV that drove past my house twice before sunrise. Priya absorbed that without flinching. I know. Do you? That's why I came before the story ran. Roe looked away for a moment, toward the empty maintenance bay, toward the Callahan Heating and Air logo on his truck door that he'd painted himself the summer Sophie was 4. He had 2 part-time employees who depended on that work. He had a daughter who asked about pancakes on Saturday because she wanted proof that Saturday was still coming. "Tell me something honestly," he said. "If I hadn't been there last night, if nobody had stepped in, would you still have built the case?" Priya didn't hesitate. "Yes. Would it have taken longer?" A pause. "Yes." He nodded once slowly. "Then congratulations. Your timeline just started living in my house." Before she could respond, another car arrived. This one moved differently from the others. Deliberate, unhurried, the way someone arrived when they expected the room to rearrange itself around them. Gerald Stovall stepped out in a coat that looked freshly pressed, expression composed, carrying the studied ease of someone who had already decided how this scene ended. He looked at Priya first, then at Roe, then at the space between them with the careful attention of a man cataloging leverage. "This is unfortunate," Gerald said pleasantly. Roe said nothing. Gerald adjusted his cuff. "Priya, I've already been in contact with 4 board members. The consensus is that the audit methodology, particularly this aspect of it, has created more operational disruption than the conduct it was designed to investigate." Priya's expression did not change. "Then the board should put that in writing." Gerald smiled. It didn't reach any part of his face above his mouth. "And you," he said, looking at Roe, "must feel very significant right now. Executive attention before 9 in the morning. I feel like I should be at work," Roe said. Gerald's smile thinned. He looked back toward Priya. "The longer this man remains adjacent to your review, the easier it becomes for 4 board members to question whether your judgment has been compromised." "My judgment is documented," Priya said. Gerald turned slightly toward Roe, and something shifted in his posture, the subtle widening of a man setting a larger trap. "Tell me, Mr. Callahan, does your daughter attend Millfield Elementary? The one on Dunmore Road?" Roe went still. Priya's head turned toward Gerald with a precision and velocity that Roe had not seen in her before. "Don't," she said. Gerald spoke over her, unhurried. "Several Hadley board members serve on the county school district's facilities committee. It would be a pity if a parent's public conduct became a subject of discussion at the next meeting." Roe took one step forward. He didn't know exactly what he intended, but Gerald's expression opened slightly in something that looked almost like anticipation, because he wanted it on record. Priya stepped between them. "Gerald," she said quietly, with the particular quiet of someone who has run out of warnings and moved directly to final language. "If you reference that child again in any context, in any communication, in any meeting, I will sign a criminal referral for executive misconduct and personally depose you before the labor board." Gerald looked at her for a long moment, recalculating. "You'll lose the board vote," he said. "Then I'll lose it honestly," she said. He returned to his car without another word. The sound of the engine faded until the lot was quiet again. Roe breathed out slowly. He didn't look at Priya immediately. He looked at the space Gerald's car had left behind. "He said Sophie's name," Roe said. "He looked up the school registration," Priya said. "Through a county donor overlap. It's how he operates. Collateral damage as currency." Roe finally looked at her. "And I'm collateral damage." Priya's answer was quiet. "You weren't supposed to be. You weren't supposed to be anything except a witness nobody noticed." "Well," Roe said, "I've never been good at that." He drove home the long way, past the hardware store where he'd bought Sophie's first toolkit, past the church parking lot where he'd taught her to ride a bike the summer after her mother died, past the places where the life he'd built existed in layers that Gerald Stovall would never understand, because men like Gerald never needed to build anything. They only needed to acquire. His phone had 17 new messages. He didn't read them until Sophie was picked up from school, until she had eaten and done her homework and fallen asleep with a library book open on her chest and the lamp still on. Then he sat at the kitchen table in the dark, one lamp in the corner, and read every message. Journalists, a county official, 3 clients he hadn't spoken to in months now calling with cautious support, and one from an unknown number sent at 4:47 in the afternoon. "Board emergency meeting tonight, 7 p.m., Hadley Tower. Priya Suresh requests your presence. She said you'd say no. She said tell you Sophie's right." He stared at the last line for a while. "Tell yours louder." He put on the jacket from Lily, from Sophie's school recital last year. It fit strangely at the shoulders, but it was clean and it was his. He left a note on the kitchen counter for his neighbor Carol, who had a key, and drove downtown. Hadley Tower was 12 floors of glass and neutrally colored authority, the kind of building designed to make everyone inside feel like they were guests at someone else's permanent address. The lobby smelled like recirculated air and corporate restraint. A security guard near the elevator didn't stop Roe but watched him all the way to the doors. Priya was waiting at the elevator bank on the 8th floor. She had traded the scrubs for a dark blazer and was holding a tablet she wasn't looking at. When the doors opened, she looked at him the way someone looked at a person who had chosen to arrive when they had every reason not to. "You came," she said. "You said Sophie was right," Rose said. "I figured I should at least find out what that meant." The boardroom held 11 people. 11 people in various configurations of expensive minimalism, with legal pads and water glasses and the specific stillness of people who had spent decades learning to reveal nothing until the moment revealing something was advantageous. At the far end, Gerald sat with both hands flat on the table, relaxed, controlled, the way someone sat when they believed they had already won. He acknowledged Roe's entrance with a slight lift of his chin. Theater. Roe recognized it and sat down. The board chair, a woman named Catherine, who had introduced herself in the elevator without explaining her role, opened by noting that the meeting was off-record pending legal review. Roe noticed 2 lawyers near the wall who had not been introduced at all. Gerald opened first. "The central issue is simple. Arceau conducted a covert audit using irregular methodology. That audit created a public incident involving an outside contractor. That contractor is now an active media presence, which threatens investor confidence in an election cycle where our county contracts are under renewal review." Several board members nodded. A few didn't, Gerald continued. "Additionally, I have submitted for the board's consideration documentation regarding Mr. Callahan's behavioral history, specifically post-service psychological evaluations and documented anger management referrals." Roe recognized the folder that appeared on the table. He had written some of those words in a hospital room 17 months after his discharge, during the stretch when his wife was still alive and already losing ground. When the insurance rejections were arriving in envelopes he'd stopped opening because he couldn't afford to read them and still function. Priya connected her tablet to the main screen without preamble. "Before we discuss behavioral history," she said, "the board should see what I was sent to find." What appeared on screen was not dramatic in presentation. No graphics, no summary headers. Just records. Vendor payments routed through Gerald's office to contractors with no traceable service agreements. Lease acceleration notices sent to 4 hospitals' preferred vendors within 48 hours of those vendors filing internal HR complaints. A log of nursing staff who had submitted anonymous reports and subsequently received negative performance reviews within 90 days. A whistleblower legal threat issued under Hadley letterhead to a charge nurse in the Brackenridge facility who had reported patient care violations 12 months ago. The board chair had gone very still. A board member near the center, older, with reading glasses he kept taking off and putting back on, said quietly, "Gerald, are these signed under your authorization?" "Asset protection is within my operational mandate," Gerald said. "These represent standard. Signed under your authorization," the board member repeated. Gerald said nothing. Priya advanced to the next document. Roe saw his name appear in a timestamp log, and below it, Sophie's school. And below that, an internal billing code from Gerald's regional office, marked under Strategic Stakeholder Management. The room's atmosphere changed. Roe looked at Gerald across the polished table. He thought about what he wanted to say. He thought about how men like Gerald expected people like him to either collapse under exposure or erupt into something that could be labeled and discarded. He thought about Sophie asking whether it was worth it. "Yes," he said, aloud, as if answering her again. Everyone looked at him. He leaned forward, hands flat against the table the way his father had taught him to stand when he had something honest to say. "I had panic attacks in grocery stores for 2 years after I came home, doors closing wrong, specific sounds. I've written it in a doctor's office, and whatever Gerald found was written in the context of someone trying to get better, not someone being assessed for threat level." No one spoke. "My wife got sick 18 months after I came home. We spent 14 months fighting insurance denials. The denials weren't arbitrary. They were policy. Somebody signed the policy." He paused. He had not planned to say the next part, but Priya had made a small sound, something nearly inaudible, and he understood from it that she knew. He looked at Gerald. "Tell me," Rose said. "Was the 2019 emergency coverage reduction on county hospital partnerships within your operational mandate too?" Gerald's composure fractured at the edge. Just at the edge. Priya advanced one more document on the screen. It was a policy authorization, a coverage reduction agreement, a signature. The board chair read the name on the signature line. She set her pen down on the table. She did not pick it up again. "Gerald," she said, "did you authorize that reduction?" Gerald looked at the room the way a man looked at a room when he finally understood that the room had already finished deciding. "Legal cost restructuring is within board-approved operational. Did you sign it?" Silence. The board chair nodded once. She did not look at Gerald again. She looked at the lawyer nearest the wall and said, "We'll need the room cleared, please." What happened next took 11 minutes. Rowe knew because he counted them in the hallway, standing near a window that overlooked a city that had no idea anything was ending inside this building tonight. Priya stood beside him. She did not speak for the first 9 of those minutes. She looked at the city the way someone looked at something they had been trying to reach for a long time and were still not sure they trusted the arrival. "The coverage reduction," Rose said. "Yes," she said. "You knew before tonight. I found it in the audit documentation 6 days ago." She paused. "I didn't know it was your wife." Rowe nodded. "I'm sorry," Priya said. He looked at her. "I know." And he did. The door opened. The lawyer came out first and spoke to Priya quietly for less than a minute. When he went back inside, Priya turned to Rowe. Emergency suspension of Gerald's authority. Full audit of his operational decisions going back 3 years. Immediate reinstatement of all vendor contracts affected by his retaliation this week. Rowe nodded. "Okay, there's more." She held out a folder. Inside was a letter on Hadley letterhead, signed by the board chair, reinstating Callahan Heating and Air to the approved vendor list across all 4 county facilities, with a 5-year guaranteed maintenance agreement attached. "This isn't charity," she said. "Every facility manager we interviewed named your company first when asked which vendors they actually trusted." Rowe looked at the folder. He thought about the drive home, about Sophie's library book, about pancakes on Saturday. "What about Priya the charge nurse?" he asked. "Does she still exist?" Something softened in her expression. "She was useful for 12 days. She found what she needed. She was also real," Rowe said. Priya considered that. "Yes," she said after a moment. "She was." They drove separately to a diner on Millfield's east side, not because it was the closest, but because Sophie had asked Carol to call Rowe when she woke up and found his note, and Sophie had been very specific about wanting to meet the nurse from the hospital. The diner was a small one, the kind with booths worn soft from years of use and a pie case that rotated daily. Carol had brought Sophie, and Sophie sat in the corner booth with a glass of milk and her library book, reading with the focused patience of a child who had learned that adults took time. When Priya walked through the door, Sophie looked up. She studied Priya the way she studied math problems, carefully without rushing. "Are you the nurse?" Sophie asked. "I was for a while," Priya said. Sophie scooted over to make room. "What are you now?" Priya sat down across from her. "Something a little harder to explain. That's okay," Sophie said. She pushed her library book across the table, as if offering something that required no explanation at all. Carol brought coffee. The pie case turned slowly near the register, and outside the window the town was still talking, still spinning whatever version of tonight it had decided to believe. Headlines were already changing. Hadley executive suspended following internal audit, county contractor at center of hospital power struggle, and by morning there would be new ones, some accurate, some not, some in between. Rowe sat across from his daughter and the woman who had spent 12 days disguised as someone ordinary, finding the truth that power had tried to bury under policy language and vendor codes and signed authorizations nobody was supposed to trace back. Sophie was explaining her library book to Priya with the methodical seriousness she brought to important subjects. "It's about a girl who finds out her town isn't what she thought," Sophie said, "but she fixes it." Priya listened with the full attention she had given everything else tonight. "Does she do it alone?" Priya asked. Sophie considered. "Sort of. But someone helps her at the beginning without knowing they're helping." Priya looked up at Rowe. He looked back at her. Outside, the night was ordinary and enormous, the way nights became when something had shifted inside them without announcement. The coffee was hot, the pie case turned. Sophie read aloud the first paragraph of her chapter just to give Priya the context she needed. And Rowe sat quietly in the warm light of a small diner, listening to his daughter's voice fill up the space where fear had been, and understood, for the first time in a long time, that the hardest part was not behind him. But for tonight, neither was the best part.